Thank you. Well, welcome to the second webinar of our series Förtätning på rätt spår. It's hosted by Urban Futures, the Center for Sustainable Urban Futures at the University of Gothenburg. My name is Henrik Zetterqvist, work for Trafikverket, the Swedish Transport Administration. For obvious reasons, Trafikverket takes a great interest into this, and we also contribute to this financially. Trafikverket, I will not bore you with what we do, but we do handle these things called state roads and railways. So without Trafikverket, there should be far less urban station communities. And today we're here to learn more about barriers and accessibility when it comes to urban station communities. So welcome to this webinar, Sanna.
Yes, welcome from me as well. My name is Sanna Isemo and I'm a project leader at Center for Sustainable Urban Futures, which is a research and knowledge center for urban sustainable development, hosted by Chalmers and Gothenburg University. And this webinar is part of the project Urban Station Communities, Densification for Good Accessibility. And that is funded by Trafikverket, the Swedish Transport Administration, and it carried out in collaboration between Urban Futures, Chalmers, Gothenburg Region, Dalarna University, and KTH. And in this project, we develop a method for inventory and impact assessment of areas close to station, based on a spatial analysis of accessibility and density, and in relation to the Agenda 2030 and Global Sustainable Development Goals, and especially goal number 11 about sustainable cities and communities. But what we'll to listen to today is a presentation from Joanna Stavroulaki, who's Associate Professor in the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering in Chalmers. And Joanna is part of our project, but she's also working in another parallel ongoing project, also funded by Trafikverket, and she's going to tell us a bit about that today. In this project, they develop a method to analyze local direct and indirect effects of road and rail infrastructure in urban environments, focusing on socioeconomic, ecological, and cultural historical effects. And this knowledge and methodology is also of importance for our Urban Station Communities project, and we will build on that. And we hope that this webinar today will raise awareness about how infrastructure barriers around station affect the local accessibility. So then I think I will hand over to you, Joanna, and we're looking forward to hear your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining and thank you for inviting me. Sanna, thank you for the introduction. So I can jump right in. Let's say you kind of introduced me and the whole project and everything is okay. Okay, so as Sanna said, I will focus on another Trafikverket project that we find that is very relevant and complementary, so to say, for the Urban Station Communities project. And this was a project aiming to assess the effects, direct, indirect, cumulative effects of road and rail infrastructure in urban environments. And we know that new road and rail infrastructure, of course, increase global accessibility, interurban, regional accessibility, and so on. But it is often the case that the potential negative effects or even potentials that are created, so positive effects in the local context and communities are often overlooked in the impact assessments that are used today. So, but we know that new infrastructure creates these local effects, again, might be positive, might be negative, that go beyond transport efficiency and have a kind of a socioeconomic, ecological, and cultural historical implications. And so far, also these three perspectives tend to either be overlooked or looked in isolation. So in a way, a part of the project was to first shift focus to the local effects created in local communities and urban areas, but also take a kind of integrated approach to include socioeconomic, environmental, and cultural historical effects, and see they are combined in a way effect on the local areas and communities. Of course, we take into account that what we call new, the changes might come from new infrastructure, but can also, especially in contemporary urban areas, can also come for a retrofit of old infrastructure. It's often the case that an old highway, for example, is now retrofitted into an urban boulevard, and a new bypass, for instance, a new highway is added in the outskirts. So we also have this type of new infrastructural projects. In a nutshell, the overall assessment methodology is based on a before and after analysis workflow, which systematically compares the existing situation of how it is, how the urban environment is, how it functions, and how it affects people, and systematically comparing this to the future scenarios proposed by planning and different design alternatives, for example. And then we take a kind of a precise measurement based on spatial analysis of the direct effects, the direct changes, but also then an assessment of the cumulative impact of multiple direct effects, like I said, in integration of these three different perspectives, and also the potential broader effects in relation also to the Sustainable Development Goals. The project team, as you see, apart from me, also includes Meta Berghauser-Pont, an associate professor from Chalmers, Monica Levan from Trafikverket, and then two experts, Oscar Kindvall from Kaluna, which is an expert on the ecological, he's an ecologist, so brings the knowledge of the ecological, in a way, perspective, and then Emil Anemo for the cultural historical perspective. So it was kind of a multi-disciplinary team, and the project lasted for a year. We're now finalizing the report. Today I will run through the overall methodology and then focus a bit more on the direct effect analysis and the indirect cumulative effect assessment, and showcase the method and potential applications of the method in two cases, in Soder Shopping and in Moldal, which are different types of infrastructural projects. Okay, so you see on one side a very detailed and long workflow, including of many steps and checkpoints and iteration processes, input from different stakeholders and so on. But I will just, I will talk about the more condensed version, so you get the main idea, which is, like I said, a very systematic before and after analysis. And to start with, of course, it has to do with what kind of a proposed infrastructure we have. We can have a new infrastructure that is going through an urban area. We can have a kind of combined change that comes from a bypass, like a new highway or new rail tracks that bypass, so go outside kind of the urban area in the periphery, and that means that the existing infrastructure through the urban area is retrofitted and integrated into the urban layout. Or we can have just a retrofit of an old infrastructure, for example, an old highway to an urban boulevard. Then one starts, of course, with a very detailed analysis of the existing situation that is also partly based on the ILCA method that is already used in Trafikverket, a very detailed description of the built environment through the three different perspectives all the time: socioeconomic, ecological, cultural, historical, with the idea, looking at the built environment, how it is, so a description of the built environment, of their networks, the users, the uses, the buildings, building density, for example, the public spaces, the land ownership, and so on. So a very detailed description of the built environment. And prioritized, of course, all the time by local knowledge about the area that can identify in relation to the experts, can identify the local potentials, the local sensitivities of the area, in relation also with the visions of the local communities, of the municipalities. So a prioritization also of what types of description are more important for this particular urban area. So, like I said, we start with a very detailed situation of the character, as we say, of the built environment, then how it functions. For example, the centrality hierarchies that they are created, the accessibility conditions that they are created right now, how the ecological landscape is functioning, and so on. So how the environment functions right now, and then also how it benefits or disbenefits people. For example, an example of the function is the proximity to primary schools, for instance. I mean, how close are the buildings to the primary schools? That's a potential created by the street network and the built environment. But if it will be a benefit for society or not also depends on the demographics. So do we have a lot of households with children, for instance, that are kind of close or far from the primary schools? So then we can talk about benefits, services, or disservices in a way. So one thing, from one side, we have the potential created from the built environment and how it functions, but then also we have to take into account the benefit that comes from how it is, how it affects people, how it is used based on the users, for instance. Then we go into a step 2, which is, like I said, again, through spatial analysis, really try to understand how the built environment functions based on its street network, based on the distribution of the green areas, for example, and how they connected, based on the cultural, historical resources that one local environment has. And then we go to the before and after analysis. So the same type of functional analysis would do it for the after situation, where, for example, now we use some schematic drawings to kind of showcase what we mean. Let's say that on the right you see a kind of situation where you might have a new infrastructure through an urban area or a suburban area that kind of potentially cuts some street network connections, or potentially cuts some spreading links, let's say some dispersal links, between urban areas, or might affect the way, I mean, a cultural building or a very important historical building is perceived in the city. So this kind of is very systematic before and after functional analysis based on spatial analysis that are selected in a way based on scientific knowledge, based on empirical evidence, based on expert knowledge or experience from practice, that we know that these are the things that we need to in a way analyze, because we know already that these are important for the way that the built environment functions and affects society. Street centrality, for example, integration, landscape connectivity, and things like that. Again, taking into account the 3 perspectives, but also the combination. And in that way, we measure the direct change, what we say the direct effects, but also assess, and I will go in detail more later to that, assess the potential indirect effects and the greater benefits for society. And this was also, I have to say, conceptually is also built, has built upon the important work that has been done by our colleague Job van Eildijk on barrier effects. Okay, so now, like I said, I want to go a bit, show some examples of the different functional analysis using some conceptual drawings before going into showcasing some the applications. So what type of direct changes do we focus on that we have prioritized, because we know that these are important in a way? I mean, if we start from the socioecological analysis, I mean, of course, you can have a new infrastructure can just have a very direct change, which is that, you know, we need to eradicate or fragment, let's say, some buildings, for instance. But I mean, that's a very straightforward effect that you may or may not have. But another thing is that the closeness, the mere closeness to infrastructure can create some disturbances for the communities that are very close to that. And that is basically one of the reasons that, one of the main reasons that we have all these bypasses now, and we try to kind of retrofit existing infrastructure within urban areas to avoid this effect, let's say, soil pollution, light pollution, noise pollution, air pollution, and so on. Of course, the accessibility can be changed by the addition, let's say, or the retrofit of all the infrastructure, because the accessibility can create some kind of physical barriers that then we need to see how the accessibility patterns change. And by accessibility, of course, we have many ways to measure that. One thing is the proximity that can change. How far am I from the nearest school, from the nearest public transport stop, and so on. The number of reach attractions, how many shops can I reach in 500 meters walking distance, for instance. Of course, we focus a lot when we talk about local effect on walking distance and distances that people choose to walk. For example, the accessibility, the distance between different infrastructures, if we have a shopping area, how close are the shops, and so on, or the catchment, of course, if we have an important service or an important activity, what is the catchment, how many households can be reached in, let's say, a walking distance of 400 meters, 500 meters, and so on. Then, of course, we have the patterns of centrality that are very, very important to take into account, patterns of integration or segregation of different areas, street hierarchy, that these patterns of centrality can change due to a new infrastructure, and we can have centrality shifts. A former very central street might no longer be that central, visual connectivity, and so on. In the same logic, we look upon the ecological perspective. And now these are schematic drawings only for like very reminiscent of a very dense urban layout, but similar drawings have been done also for more suburban situations and outskirts, let's say, but just to showcase. We talk about connectivity or fragmentation between green areas that might affect the way some species fly, for instance, from green to green area, which is very important for these dispersal links. A new infrastructure might have a very straightforward effect like road kills or direct species mortality, of course. Again, the closeness to infrastructure can affect the green areas in many ways. Like we said, the diversity of habitat types is also something very important that can be disturbed, let's say. So it's not only if we lose a green patch because of new infrastructure, it's also what type of habitat do we lose, for instance, or do we fragment, because that particular type might be very important for the biodiversity or might even be unique in this particular area. And also the socio-ecologic aspect, which is the accessibility of people to green areas. So how far is it to the nearest park, for example, or how far is it to how many parks can I reach, and so on. And also, if we look at the cultural, historical perspective, a very important thing, of course, is how do we, how are the cultural historical resources can be historical buildings or ensembles or particular neighborhoods that in a way new infrastructure can change the way we approach them. Of course, how far are we from them, but also the way we approach them. Sometimes, I mean, historical buildings have been built, for instance, to be perceived frontally. And it might be the case that the new infrastructure shifts centrality patterns so much that people now would tend to approach them from the side, for instance. So it's very important to see how the new centrality pattern, so the new street hierarchy, might affect the way, the placement, the contextualization of cultural buildings, for example, within the new situation. So you might have, for instance, a very important historical street that used to be very central. So the movement patterns, I mean, people would tend to walk through it. And it's also the case that they have also a kind of a commercial activity, but maybe with the new situation, then the new centrality shifts, then this historical street is no longer that central, and so on. Or we might have the kind of an opposite situation where the removal, kind of the retrofit of a new infrastructure, and this is often the case in new urban projects, that suddenly, once you retrofit an old infrastructure, let's say, there might be room for densification. So in a way, you might, how do you say, gain some buildable land, but sometimes what is added is very different in a way from what was already there, like say, from a cultural historical perspective. And we see that happening a lot with suburban areas that were from the 60s, for example, and now the new densifications have a completely different building type. And so there you can have a structural change, let's say, with the new infills. Yes, but then once we have such, I gave you some examples now, some important spatial analysis that show us how the functioning of the built environment has changed, this before and after. There we can measure in a way these direct changes, the direct effects. For example, did we say, has the average walking to a green area, for instance, the average walking distance to a green area might directly increase by 100 meters. That is a direct change, that's a direct effect. If this is a significant increase, and so will it create a problem in a way? Will it affect to the choice of people to walk there to this green area or not? Depends if these 100 meters in a way cross a significant threshold. To be more concrete, we know in a way that people tend to walk to destinations if they are kind of not over a 500 meters walking distance. Then, I mean, things become to kind of decrease in a way. So if let's say already the proximity to urban areas was very good, let's say it was like in 200 meters, one could reach a green area, then perhaps the 100 meters change would not be a significant change. But if it was already kind of a sensitive situation where, you know, this park, for instance, was 450 meters far, so then this 100 meters would make it, like say, cross this threshold of significance. Yes, then we can say we have a significant change. And then we have this indirect effect of, you know, of the choice of people to walk, also in relation to their ability to walk. And then we can talk about if these direct changes indeed create indirect effects that have to do with the equal access to green of all households, for example, of the equal exposure to green, is the walkability affected? Because we know that proximity to green also affects walkability. And then, of course, broader effects in health, mental health, livability, social equity, and so on. So once we identify the significant changes, then we can start to assess the indirect effects that are important for society. And another thing is that we do not, of course, I mean, first we break it down because that's the only way to be precise and accurate and study the direct effects in isolation. But of course, then we have a lot of direct effects happening at the same time from the different perspectives, socio-ecological, cultural, historical, ecological. So we need to see the cumulative effects. For instance, we have an increase, for example, in a proximity to a greener area because of the changes. At the same time, you have an increase in centrality, perhaps, on the street that leads there, or you have an increase in an amount of accessible green areas, or an increase in build density. You also have densification. So together, these effects, we need to look at them in combination and to see the cumulative effects. Then we can talk about, do we have an increase in the access to green? Or in the walkability? Do we have larger visitation rates to the green areas because of these combined changes? And then we start to see that, okay, sometimes we also have conflicting effects. For example, if the visitation rates of people into one urban green area increase, that might have a kind of a negative effect from the ecological perspective. So it's very good, positive for the socioeconomic perspective and the social perspective, but for the ecological perspective, this might create a problem because there will be more human disturbances in that green area that will affect other species. So we see that once we start to talk about cumulative effects, we start to also see synergies, but also conflicts. And there is where we would need, for example, mitigation measures to kind of address some potential sensitivities in the pollination, for example, in biodiversity, in the species population, and things like that. Okay, I will now, I kind of roughly went through the method, and I will now show two examples to just showcase how we can use this method and draw some first findings, let's say. And we have two cases. One is this case is Sondershöping, where we had E22 passing through the urban area. And now there is a new bypass, let's say, in the periphery of the city. That means that that we have now a potential that E22 can be integrated in the urban tissue, the urban structure, and then be retrofitted into an urban boulevard. And then a different case in Moldal, where we have a new kind of a change in a new rail station of the fast train, let's say the high-speed train added there. So an increase in a way on the impact and the potential of this station in relation to a densification project in Forsåker and some new links, let's say some new bridges that come to that. So it's kind of a combined case of a new infrastructure, densification project, and new links and so on of that of this central station in Moldal. And to start with Sondershöping, I mean, like I said, one of the things that one looks, and one of the reasons that we had even to begin with this project, I suppose, is because there was, of course, a very closeness to infrastructure within the city. So you see here how many buildings, for instance, in the black color, there were closer than 100 meters to the highway. And then the red buildings were closer than 500 meters to the highway. So in a way, there were a lot of buildings. And also, if you see here, a lot of houses that were very close to the old highway, noise, air pollution, and so on. So in a way, with the new, if you see the after situation here, with the new bypass, of course, I mean, the situation is greatly improved. Now you have, I mean, even buildings that are actually very close to the highway, less than 100 meters, maybe like 3 houses or something. I mean, it's like, of course, the situation has been greatly improved. And also we can see that in the change maps here, when we use thresholds, like I said, to kind of visualize where the significant positive changes happen. You see them in orange. Where the significant negative changes happen, you would see them in dark purple, but we have none. So, I mean, we do not have a significant negative change from the new situation. You can see, though, that if we look at, be more targeted in a way and look at schools, then we might have, in a way, some situations where a school is now very close to the new infrastructure and so on. Another thing we can highlight is that here, for instance, if we see the global centrality analysis and which streets were very central in the motorized network, so for car through movement, where it was the before situation and the after situation, we see that in a way this changes. So the kind of the old highway now is not the main central street for car in the car network, let's say centrality. So here in Södershopping, we had a kind of usual large retail area that really highly depended on the car through traffic. And now we see that the situation of this urban area has changed in a way. It has kind of been recontextualized, that is now far in a way from the drive-through movement, the passers-by, let's say, through movement, which now goes outside of the city. And we see it, but we see a complementary change in the non-motorized network. So what we see is that now this area might have lost in car through movement, but has gained in pedestrian accessibility, because now it's very central in the pedestrian network. So you see how we can see with this analysis how an existing urban neighborhood, let's say urban area, which now has a specific function of large retail, for instance, has now been recontextualized. That means new possibilities can emerge for new land uses, let's say, or relocations and so on, because now we have a gain in car accessibility and a decrease in car accessibility and an increase in pedestrian accessibility. Yes, I will move on.
Sorry to interrupt you, Anna. I just want to remind you of the time.
Yes, okay. And then we can, of course, measure that with, if we take the catchment of, for example, a very large shopping center, the pedestrian catchment, and the connection to the, to check the connection to the main car street, for instance. Then the general accessibility, we see that has not changed. So we run, you can run a lot of different accessibility analysis, distance to walking distance to natural areas, to water, and so on, to check if there is an actual change or specific targeted proximity analysis. For example, how far is it from the bus stop to the high school, and see, okay, within this new situation, we might need to check where the new bus stops would be. They shouldn't be too far from the high school, and so on. These are based on very local needs, let's say. But also we see that one of the biggest changes is also has to do with in a way the cultural historical analysis, which is how the city now is kind of perceived by the passers-by. Like I said, that now we do not have a through movement through the city from visitors or passers-by, that you would get glimpses of the city and also the medieval area that is here. So we now have a peripheral kind of vision to the city from passers-by, from visitors, and two different ways to go into the city center from a completely different, let's say, angles. That has to do with a kind of the cultural, historical positioning, let's say, of the city and how it is experienced. but most importantly, how the old historical streets and the medieval center, let's say, that already had some hierarchies and some important streets, now with the change and the kind of increase of this potential of the old highway, now let's say potentially an urban boulevard that will now have kind of a greater centrality and will attract people, then we might have the historical urban street that is also kind of a shopping street, kind of lose perhaps potential flow. So we see that from the cultural historical perspective, we can have a shift in centrality that affects historical streets and how central they are in the new situation. I will not go into that. Also, the connectivity analysis, the landscape connectivity analysis that identifies some sensitivities for specific species in an area. And I don't have that much time, but I have some couple of examples from the Moldal case, which is very short in a way, because now in Moldal, we don't have a change in the actual infrastructure of the layout, let's say, of the infrastructure. We just have an increase in rail tracks. So we have kind of the same placement of the highway and the rail tracks here, and the station, which does not move, but we have an increase in a way on the frequency of the rail tracks and so on. So in a way, we can have an assessment of the existing situation and the closeness to infrastructure and which buildings are affected. But this does not change, but still we can identify some, let's say, sensitivities in schools, for instance, or in historical buildings. But, and also the landscape connectivity will not change that much because, like I said, the layout of the new street does not change. But this is part of the assessment of the existing situation and prioritization of, okay, where do we need to do a before and after analysis? Where is it needed? I want to focus on one thing that we thought that is the most important, most interesting change in a way. So I will just move to that. What is happening is that with the new, if we see here, with the new densification area here in Forsåker, in relation with the new bridges, the existing situation in Moldal does not change. So this will not impact Moldal, neither accessibility. I mean, the situation will remain as it was. But we see that in the new urban area that is densified here in Forsåker, we have a very strong cultural, historical resource. And this is the Kvarnbyn Gatan, and also the papyrus, this old industry. And we see how it is in the existing situation and how it will be completely recontextualized in the new situation. I mean, it's obvious the potential that is created here. From one hand, we do not, Kvarnbyn Gatan is already very central, and this will not change. So that is very good. Of course, it will have a greater access to more households because of the densification area. But we see the potential created for the use of this historical, the papyrus, let's say, how this is completely centralized now. And also that the patterns that one could approach this, the people, let's say, could approach this building has completely changed. So you see, I mean, it's obvious how it has been completely recontextualized in the heart of the urban area and also in relation to the very central paths through that urban area. And also what will significantly change, of course, is the catchment, the pedestrian catchment of the new of the station in the new situation. Of course, you see that now again the station was kind of the edge, but now is in the center, kind of. So again, a recontextualization, one of the main significant changes that will happen. And of course, that this method could in a way also use, like I said, the existing situation in Moldal will not change, but is a way to assess, okay, is the new urban area created Forsåker, for instance, is it serviced enough by activities, by public service and so on? do we have a need to take measures there, and so on. I think I will end here, and thank you. I'm sorry if I took more time than I was expected to.